If you live in Louisville, you'll definitely recognize these 3 iconic boats on the wharf, like the Belle of Louisville, the Mary M. Miller, and, It may look peaceful now, but the Falls of the Ohio were actually the most dangerous part of the Ohio River. In fact, this area consisted of about 2.5 miles of whitewater rapids that split river navigation in half. These rapids were formed by fossilized remains of an ancient coral reef. Because of the size of this coral reef, it was so vast that it was resistant to the normal erosion of limestone in the water, and that caused a change in the shape of the river. For about a millennia, because of the river's shape, this served as a common meeting place for people. Later, when Europeans started colonizing the land, they used what were natural chutes. There were 3 of them that they could navigate to pass through the falls safely, and also quickly, and that's actually where the name chute comes from. Now we're looking west, and later on into the 1800s, in the age of steamboats, passage was aided by the creation of the Louisville and Portland Canal, which later became the McAlpin Locks and Dam. Later, as river traffic grew more and more, the broadest chute was actually widened in order to help larger vessels through that passage. But even still, you would need to hire a local experienced guide that could take you past the risky part of the falls. And so it's no wonder then that this area was highly prone to accidents. And where there are accidents, you might need some further help. The first crew was referred to as the Falls Heroes, a name given to them by a local newspaper columnist recognizing their bravery. The story starts in 1876 when a skiff belonging to the steam towboat the John Gilmore capsized. 3 men were inside and were seen clinging to it and calling for help. Billy Devon and Jack Gillooly were 2 workers at a floating coal dock. Luckily, they had a skiff themselves, in which they rushed toward the foot of the Falls of the Ohio to rescue the 3 men just in time. The next week, Gillooly was not around when Devon saw another accident. He called out to John Tully, a local fisherman who was familiar navigating the falls, who joined Devon to help. The 3 of them thus banded together as the Falls Heroes. In 1879, they were given 3 gold life-saving medals of honor by the U.S. Congress. By this point, they had saved 45 lives. After this, advocacy for an official life-saving station began. People were skeptical in Washington because there were no inland life-saving stations so far. In May 1881, 2 officials came to the falls to inspect the situation. Although they initially deemed it a folly, after riding in the chute with the Falls Heroes in the skiff that had become their lifeboat, they realized that there was a genuine need. The first idea was for a station to be built high up on the Falls of the Ohio with signal lights. This was deemed too expensive, and so a floating life-saving station with a watchtower was proposed. Life-saving Station Number 10 officially began service in 1881 with Billy Devon as the keeper. The boats in the 1881 station were named Reckless and Ready. They were involved in some notable early rescues, like the rescue of more than 100 people in 1882 when the steamer James D. Parker wrecked on the Falls of the Ohio. 39 people were rescued in an 1883 flood, after which the mayor finally gave the life-saving crew their first watertight gear. They delivered food to people who were unable to leave their flooded homes and businesses in 1884, and also the rescue of a steamboat called the Hibernia that broke loose in the 1890 tornado. Their work was described as routinely arduous, extremely boring, punctuated by the sudden bursts of peril, even sheer terror, of plunging into roaring whitewater falls and over dams in open boats. Their job consisted of long hours in the lookout tower, and first they used a spyglass, but later that became binoculars that they shared when they would spend hours looking out across the river, making sure they were scanning for threats, to public safety, or especially searching for people in trouble. And to make sure they were awake, they were required to use a time clock and punch in every 15 minutes. The original station was made out of wood, which quickly rotted away. By 1902, a new boat was desperately needed. A new one was delivered to the wharf on November 6, 1902. The original 1881 station was sold for $226 to become the wharf boat at Patriot, Indiana. In 1908, the station got its first motorized powerboat built upriver at the Howard Shipyard. Before that, they had to row. In 1911, things started to shift for the second station. Devon passed away, and Gillooly was put in charge. Technological advancements came quickly, so a telephone was installed in 1911. Gillooly, also known as Captain Jack, was skeptical of having a radio on board the life-saving station. After the Titanic sank, a bill went up in Congress to get radios on all life-saving stations. However, because this life-saving station was an exception anyway, because it was inland, Gillooly successfully avoided getting a radio on board until after the 1937 flood. In 1912, ice clogged the Ohio River. The force of the ice traveling downriver brought several huge vessels with it. The ropes were heavily strained, quote, quivering like violin strings. The boat sustained damage during that event, and so finally, the idea of a steel-hulled life-saving station took shape. In 1913, they traveled upriver to help with flooding in the Cincinnati area. They saved approximately 500 families from around Dayton, Kentucky. In 1914, the steamer Queen City sank at the falls on the way to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, and 215 people were saved, many of them notable people from large cities. These influential passengers helped persuade Washington, D.C. to make this life-saving station part of the Coast Guard officially. By 1915, a lot of the things about life-saving station number 10 had become outdated. The technology, the equipment, and the pay structure. The young and agile lifesavers needed couldn't afford to work for the low wages and lack of pension that the life-saving station offered. Presidents Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson were also big on government efficiency, so lots of outdated departments having to do with old tech like steamboats were closed and folded into other things. Taft decided that the life-saving service was closest to the lighthouse service, and to this day, we still belong to historical organizations devoted to the lighthouse service. In 1915, the life-saving service officially became the Coast Guard. Soon after, the first tragic loss of a serviceman happened. Boatman John Munns was lost in a life-saving expedition at only 27 years old. In 1929, the Coast Guard finally got a boat with a steel hull. This vessel, Coast Guard Life-Saving Station Louisville, was the last life-saving station to arrive at the wharf. It's been at this spot since 1936, when the construction of the 2nd Street Bridge made it necessary to move. This boat had all the latest 1920s technology. That included 2 skiffs, a surf boat, and a motorboat. But during Prohibition, the station's mission took a bit of a turn. In addition to daring rescues, the Coast Guard was also charged with enforcing the Volstead Act. This means that the Coast Guard servicemen here had to patrol the many small and remote islands in the area to find illicit distilleries. Later during World War II, the lookout kept an eye on the river for spy activity and other operations meant to disrupt American trade. By the 1970s, the boat was decommissioned due to budget cuts, but it was renamed the Mayor Andrew Broaddus, and it was converted into office spaces for another old boat that had been recently rescued, the Belle of Louisville. Check out our website for tickets, annual passes, and more historical info. We'll be posting more videos, so we'll see you next time.